She boarded the flight like any other traveler, quiet, unnoticed, and carrying only a small backpack that looked too light for an international trip. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. No designer luggage, no entourage, no signs of importance. She paused briefly at the aircraft door, letting other passengers pass, then stepped inside with the calm patience of someone used to waiting. The flight attendants greeted her with rehearsed smiles, already moving on before her boarding pass was fully scanned. To them, she was just another face in a long line, another seat to be filled, another name to be forgotten once the doors closed. Seat 22C was in the middle section of economy, wedged between strangers who immediately claimed the armrests. She settled in without complaint, sliding her backpack beneath the seat in front of her with practiced efficiency. The man by the window adjusted his headphones, already lost in music. The woman by the aisle flipped through a travel magazine. No one asked her where she was from or where she was going. To everyone around her, she was just a tourist flying from Rome to Washington, D.C., one of hundreds crossing the Atlantic that day, carried by routine and schedules. Her name on the boarding pass meant nothing to anyone nearby. It was ordinary, unremarkable, easily overlooked. Names like hers passed through airports every hour, printed on paper, scanned, and discarded. She glanced at it once before tucking it away, her expression unreadable. There was no hesitation in her movements, no anxiety about flying, no nervous glance toward the cockpit. If anything, she seemed too comfortable, as if the sounds of boarding announcements and overhead bins closing were familiar in a way vacations never quite make them. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its long taxi, the cabin slowly settled into its familiar rhythm. Safety instructions played on the screens, ignored by most. Seatbelts clicked. The engines roared as the plane accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the Italian sky. Soon, the city faded beneath the clouds, replaced by open blue and endless distance. Passengers relaxed. Conversations softened. A collective sense of suspension took over, the feeling of being nowhere and everywhere at once. Once cruising altitude was reached, routine took full control. Movies flickered to life on seatback screens, casting shifting light across tired faces. Flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle, offering drinks and reheated meals with practiced efficiency. Coffee was poured, trays were unfolded, and the hum of the engines became a constant background presence. It was the sound of safety, of normalcy, of a system working exactly as designed. Nothing suggested that this flight was any different from thousands of others crossing the Atlantic that week. Inside the cockpit, however, a small anomaly appeared on one of the digital displays. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms blared, no warning lights flashed red. It was simply a flag during a routine identity cross-check, the kind pilots and systems ran without thinking. A single passenger record had triggered an additional layer of verification, not a threat alert, not a security breach. Something far less common and far more unusual. The captain leaned closer to the screen, his expression tightening as he read the classification note. The credential tied to the name was buried deep in archived defense databases, rarely accessed and almost never triggered. It indicated a legacy military call sign, one that had not been active for years. These call signs were assigned to individuals who had operated beyond conventional missions, often in aircraft that officially never existed. The system wasn't suggesting danger, it was signaling recognition. Someone on this plane was registered under protocols designed to protect airspace priorities tied to national defense history. Air traffic control was notified quietly through secure channels invisible to the civilian world. The request was coded, precise, and deliberately calm. Within minutes, the information moved beyond airline operations and into military command structures. The Pentagon confirmed the data without hesitation. The woman, in seat 22C, wasn't just a tourist on vacation. She was a former classified test pilot, retired under deep cover protocols that erased her public record while preserving her strategic status. Her call sign, though inactive, remained protected. No alarms sounded in the cabin. No announcements interrupted the movie selections or coffee service. There was no reason to alarm passengers or crew. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, quietly adapting. But far above the clouds, far from the awareness of anyone on board, engines ignited on the East Coast. 2 fighters were scrambled, not in response to danger, but out of respect for protocol and legacy. They lifted off with precision, cutting through the sky toward a rendezvous point calculated down to the second. The commercial flight continued steadily on its path, unaware that history was aligning around it. In seat 22C, the woman stared at the screen in front of her without really watching it. She felt the subtle vibration of the aircraft, the familiar pressure changes, the quiet discipline of flight. Somewhere deep inside, she sensed what was coming. Some call signs never truly retire. 3 hours from landing, while most passengers were lost in half-sleep or glowing screens, a secure message appeared on the captain's display. It didn't chime or flash like ordinary communications. It simply waited, unmistakable in its priority. Maintain current heading. Do not alter altitude. The words were brief, deliberate, and left no room for interpretation. The captain exchanged a glance with the first officer, both instantly aware this was not an airline directive. This was military airspace language, calm and absolute, carrying authority that required no explanation or debate. Seconds later, the first officer leaned toward the cockpit window, his breath catching just slightly. 2 shapes emerged from the pale blue distance, moving with impossible smoothness. They weren't approaching aggressively or defensively. They were sliding into position, matching speed and altitude with effortless precision. Grey fuselages, sharp lines, unmistakable silhouettes. This wasn't a casual flyby or training pass. It was an escort formation reserved for the highest level of national priority, a configuration most pilots only ever saw in classified briefings. The presence of the aircraft changed the atmosphere instantly, even without an announcement. Passengers near the windows noticed first, pressing closer to the glass, whispering in confusion. Phones lost signal almost at once, screens blinking into airplane mode, regardless of settings. The outside view filled with wings, bearing muted US markings, close enough to feel unreal. Conversations died down, replaced by uneasy silence. People sensed something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand what or why. This wasn't turbulence or delay. This was intention. In seat 22C, the woman did not look out the window. She closed her eyes slowly, as if acknowledging an old memory rather than reacting to a surprise. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged. She knew the formation without seeing it, the spacing, the angles, the discipline of movement. It was etched into her muscle memory. She had once flown in that exact position years ago, when the sky belonged only to those cleared to touch it. Time had passed, but formations like that never left you. As the aircraft crossed into controlled US airspace, coordination became seamless. Civilian air traffic stepped back, replaced by military guidance transmitted through secure channels. The plane's path adjusted subtly, invisible to passengers but exact in execution. Every mile was measured, every second accounted for. The fighters never wavered, maintaining their silent vigil just outside the cockpit windows. Inside the cabin, speculation ran quietly from seat to seat, VIP theories, emergency scenarios, but no explanation came and no reassurance was offered. The descent toward Andrews Air Force Base was smooth, almost ceremonial. The runway lights appeared through thinning clouds, aligned perfectly with the aircraft's approach. The landing was gentle, precise, executed by a crew now fully aware they were part of something far beyond a routine flight. As the wheels touched down, there was no applause, no cheers, Only a subdued stillness. The fighters peeled away at the last moment, banking sharply and disappearing into the sky as cleanly as they had arrived. Instead of taxiing toward a terminal, the plane was guided to a remote section of the runway. No emergency vehicles followed. No flashing lights or sirens broke the calm. Everything unfolded with controlled efficiency. The engines powered down, and the cabin waited, uncertain and tense. Flight attendants stood quietly at their stations, instructed moments earlier to say nothing. The doors remained closed longer than usual, stretching seconds into minutes, until footsteps approached from outside the aircraft. A single Air Force officer boarded, uniform crisp, expression respectful but serious. He did not address the cabin or explain his presence. His eyes moved calmly down the aisle, counting rows until he reached 22. He stopped beside the middle seat and leaned in just enough to be heard by the woman alone. His voice was low, steady, and carried no ceremony despite the weight behind it. "Mom," he said simply, "welcome home." The woman opened her eyes and looked up at him. For a brief moment, something passed between them: recognition, respect, and shared understanding. She stood without hesitation, retrieving her backpack from beneath the seat. There was no smile, no dramatic pause, just a nod, small and precise. As she stepped into the aisle, passengers watched in stunned silence. No one spoke, no one filmed. It felt instinctively wrong to break the moment with noise. She walked down the aisle with quiet confidence. Every step measured, every movement controlled. At the door she turned once, not toward the cabin, but toward the cockpit. The captain met her gaze and inclined his head slightly. It was enough. Then she disappeared beyond the threshold, escorted into waiting vehicles on the tarmac. The door closed. The plane remained still, as if catching its breath after brushing against history. Only later, long after passengers reached their destinations, did a short news note appear. It was buried deep in routine aviation updates, written in neutral language. A routine commercial flight received a temporary military escort due to a protected legacy aviation clearance. There was no name attached, no photograph released, no interview requested. Just a reminder, easily missed, that some lives move quietly through the world, and that sometimes history sits unnoticed in seat 22C.